The storm came, without mercy. Rain lashed against the city like glass, breaking in slow motion, the sound of water devouring pavement, the kind of storm that made even New York hold its breath. Traffic lights blinked red through the mist, cabs crawled along flooded streets, and somewhere above it all, a tower of glass stood indifferent, the headquarters of Lockhart and Hale Enterprises. Inside, the air was dry cold and almost too still. The storm existed only as a faint hum against the windows, like the heartbeat of a world that didn't belong here. In the lobby, employees moved like ghosts, polished, efficient, terrified. They didn't speak when he walked by. They didn't need to. His name alone rearranged the air. Michael Lockhart, 39, self-made billionaire CEO with ice in his voice and precision in every breath. He was the kind of man whose silence said more than other people's entire vocabulary. They called him the wall behind his back because no one ever got through. And walking a few steps behind him, clutching a folder to her chest like a shield, was Grace Johnson. 28. Sharp mind, soft eyes, skin like deep bronze silk. She'd worked for him a year long enough to know the rhythm of his footsteps, the small exhale he made when irritated, the way he said grace only when something went wrong. She used to think she was invisible to him. Some days she still hoped she was. Her blouse clung to her skin, pale rose fabric gone darker from the rain. She'd run from the bus stop cursing herself for forgetting an umbrella. Now she stood by the elevator trying to look composed, even as water slid from the ends of her curls down the back of her neck. Michael checked his watch, jaw tight. Traffic's going to be a nightmare, he muttered, more to himself than her. Grace blinked, startled. He'd spoken first. No orders, no corrections, just words. The elevator arrived with a muted ding. They stepped in together. Stainless steel walls. A mirror that distorted more than reflected. She pressed the top floor. He stood beside her, scrolling through his watch, impatience, radiating like static. 5 seconds later, the lights flickered. Then silence. The hum of the elevator stopped. The floor gave a small jolt. The world froze between floors. Grace's heart tripped. She tapped the button once, twice. Nothing. Michael pressed the emergency line. Static answered, then a faint voice. Temporary power issue due to the storm. Please remain calm. He exhaled sharply. Frustration, not fear. Unbelievable. Grace pressed herself against the wall, clutching her folder tighter. The air felt too close, too still. Minutes passed. Neither spoke. The only sound was the faint buzz of emergency lights and the rhythm of his tapping foot. Grace tried to breathe evenly. It's fine. Just a storm. Just a delay. But the silence grew thick, heavier than the steel walls themselves. She glanced at him. Tall, composed profile, sharp as a cut gemstone. But his jaw was tense, his eyes unreadable. He looked like a man who'd spent too long pretending not to feel. Maybe it was the confinement, maybe nerves, or maybe she just couldn't bear the quiet anymore. Her voice came out small but steady. Do you ever wonder what people would say at your funeral? The words hung between them. Strange, almost absurd. Michael turned his head slowly. What? Her throat tightened. Sorry. That came out weird. She looked down, embarrassed. I just meant. Sometimes I think about it. If I disappeared tomorrow, what would people remember about me? He stared at her. Not angry, not mocking, just surprised. Then something softened around his eyes, like he was seeing her for the first time. And what do you think they'd say? Grace gave a small shrug, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. That I was kind, maybe. That I brought muffins sometimes. That I kept to myself. Michael raised an eyebrow. You think that's all people see? She met his gaze, her voice quieter now. That's all I let them see. A silence followed, not cold this time. Something had shifted, subtle and human. He nodded once, almost to himself. Neither do I. It was barely a confession, but it cracked the air open. Grace looked at him, truly looked. The infamous Michael Lockhart didn't seem untouchable anymore. His posture had loosened, his voice no longer cut. I used to be different, she said after a moment, more open. I think everyone starts that way, until something makes them close the door. He studied her face as if reading a story between her words. What closed yours? She hesitated, eyes flicking to the floor. Losing someone. The kind of loss that doesn't just break your heart, it rewires who you are. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just listened. I was engaged, she continued, voice trembling. He was the kind of man who left notes in your lunchbox. He died in a car accident. One moment I was texting him about dinner. The next I was signing hospital papers. Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. After that I just folded in on myself. Work was the only thing that didn't hurt. The elevator felt smaller now, not from fear, but from the intimacy of her truth. Michael's voice, when it came, was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I lost someone too. My brother. Cancer. Grace looked up surprised. He was the loud one, Michael said. The light in every room. When he died, I got quieter. People thought I was ambitious. I was just running from grief. She took a slow breath. Did it work? He shook his head. Grief waits. It hides in your shadow until you stop moving. The two of them stood there, two strangers bound by silence and memory, suspended between floors, between who they were and who they'd become. Grace found herself smiling faintly. Funny. We've worked together a year, and this is the first real conversation we've had. Michael leaned back against the wall. Elevators do that. Trap you long enough you forget who you're pretending to be. Her laughter was soft, warm. Then maybe we should get stuck more often. The lights flickered again, a low hum stirred beneath their feet. Michael's eyes lifted to the ceiling, then back to her. Grace, he began, but the elevator jolted, moving again. The moment collapsed like a wave hitting shore. The doors slid open to a brightly lit hallway. Time resumed its rhythm. Grace hesitated at the threshold. Michael stood still, eyes fixed on her. Something new in them, something unguarded. He reached out almost without thinking and brushed her arm lightly. Grace, he said softly, let's not pretend again. Her breath caught, but before she could answer, a voice called from the hallway, an assistant asking for him. The spell broke. She stepped out. When the doors closed behind her, he was still staring, his reflection fading into the mirrored walls. That night, Michael Lockhart didn't sleep. Not because of deadlines or deals, but because of her voice, echoing through his mind. Do you ever wonder what people would say at your funeral? He sat on his balcony, rain still drizzling, the city below glittering like fragments of broken light. He thought about all the people who'd worked for him, all the conversations that had died before they began, all the years spent being the wall. And now, one quiet woman with trembling hands and steady eyes had cracked him open in a single question. He realized he didn't fear the storm. He feared the silence after it, the kind that came from a life too closed to feel. Below, a taxi horn wailed. Somewhere, thunder rolled again. Michael closed his eyes and whispered the truth he couldn't tell her yet. I don't want to be the man people forget. When he opened them, dawn was a thin line of gold across the skyline. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. But down the street, the storm had left more than puddles. A single elevator in Lockhart Tower flickered, again lights stuttering as if something unfinished still lingered there. Something waiting. The elevator resumed its slow climb, humming like a machine waking from a dream. Neither of them spoke. When the doors opened, the sterile light of the hallway hit them too bright, too ordinary. But something invisible hung between them, a silence that felt alive. Grace followed Michael to his office, her pulse still tangled from what had just happened. The air smelled faintly of rain and steel. She told herself to forget the conversation, to fold it up and bury it somewhere quiet, but the echo of his voice lingered. Neither do I. Inside his glass-walled office, Michael stood by the window, watching lightning fracture the sky over Manhattan. His reflection looked back at him, sharp suit, cold eyes, the perfect armor. But the armor had cracked. For the first time in years, he felt seen. He didn't like it. He had built his empire on control of markets, of people, of himself. Yet a single question from his assistant had pried open a door he thought he'd sealed shut. What would people say at your funeral? He hated that it haunted him. Hated that her words had followed him home last night and were still echoing this morning, soft but relentless. He rubbed the back of his neck, frustrated. "Get it together, Lockhart," he muttered. But his reflection only stared back, unimpressed. Grace tried to keep her day normal. She typed, filed, answered calls. On the surface, nothing had changed. But every sound, the click of his shoes in the hallway, the faint clearing of his throat sent her nerves spinning. She wasn't used to being noticed, especially not by someone like him. Men like Michael didn't see women like her. They looked through them as though kindness or color or quiet didn't belong in their world of glass and steel. So, when he paused beside her desk that afternoon, she froze. "Grace," he said, voice low. "About earlier." Her fingers stilled above the keyboard. "Yes, sir?" He hesitated, a foreign gesture for a man who never hesitated. "Thank you for keeping calm." Her brows furrowed. In the elevator, he nodded once. Most people panic. You didn't. Grace almost smiled. If only you knew, she thought. Out loud, she said, "I've learned panic doesn't change much." Michael studied her face as if searching for the rest of that sentence, the pain hiding behind it. Then, too quickly, he looked away. "Good. That's admirable." And just like that, the door between them began to close again. But that night, Grace couldn't stop replaying it. Not the storm, not the silence, not the strange flicker in his eyes. She sat by her apartment window, a cup of tea cooling between her palms. Outside, the rain had turned to fog, wrapping the city in soft gray. She remembered his confession. "My brother. Cancer." The way his voice had cracked on the word light. He wasn't who she thought he was. Not entirely. Beneath the precision and arrogance was a man still running from something unseen, and she hated that it made her curious. Because curiosity was dangerous. It made her remember what it felt like to reach for someone and lose them. Her late fiancé's laugh still lived somewhere in her mind. That night, she dreamed of headlights, screeching brakes, and the single text she never got to send. "Come home, please." When she woke, the sun was pale and hesitant, like it too was afraid to begin again. At the office, Michael was already there, early, unreadable. His eyes lifted briefly as she entered. "Morning." The word startled her. It was the first he'd ever given her that wasn't about work. "Morning," she replied quietly. He didn't smile, but the corners of his eyes softened. "How's the project timeline? All on schedule?" He nodded, but the question had only been camouflage. He wanted to speak, but didn't know how. He was a man fluent in deals, not emotions. His entire empire ran on signatures and silence. And yet, as she handed him the reports, his fingers brushed hers barely accidentally, and something flickered between them again. Recognition, warmth, guilt. Grace pulled back first. Will that be all? Mr. Lockhart? Michael looked at her for a heartbeat too long before saying, Yes, thank you. But when she left, he closed his eyes and whispered, Don't pretend again. He didn't even realize he'd said it out loud. That evening, a blackout swept through part of the city. Power surged, lights flickered, and for a split second, Michael's entire floor went dark. The sound of rain returned louder, this time closer. He walked through the corridor, phone flashlight cutting through the shadows. The elevator doors were half open, jammed mid-floor just like yesterday. The sight made his pulse stutter. He found himself standing before it, staring at the metal walls. The reflection was gone, replaced by memory. Her voice trembling but steady. I stopped dreaming, so I wouldn't be disappointed. His own answer raw and quiet. I stopped loving, so I wouldn't lose. For a moment he wanted to step inside again, to feel that strange calm in chaos. But the doors creaked shut, and the moment vanished. Still, as he turned to leave, he caught sight of something wedged in the corner. A single hair clip, small gold, the kind that might have slipped from her curls yesterday. He picked it up, thumb tracing its smooth curve. The next morning, he placed it carefully on her desk. No note, no explanation. Grace saw it when she arrived, paused, heart rising to her throat. She looked toward his office through the glass. He was already watching her. For a long second, neither of them looked away. And in that silence, charged, uncertain, fragile, both knew something had shifted again. Grace touched the clip gently, then tucked it behind her ear. It felt almost like armor. Michael exhaled, turning toward the window, pretending to read. But his reflection in the glass betrayed him a faint, involuntary smile. Later that day, an executive meeting was called. The storm had caused data loss on several client accounts. Tempers ran high. Michael's voice sliced through the chaos, calm, commanding. Grace took notes quietly from the corner. Then a senior manager snapped, Your assistant misfiled half of the reports last quarter. Maybe that's where your numbers went. All eyes turned to her. Grace froze, throat dry. Before she could speak, Michael's voice cut through the room like a blade. She didn't misfile them, he said evenly. I did. I moved the accounts to a private audit without logging it. Don't make her a scapegoat for your panic. The room went still. Grace stared at him, shocked. No one ever contradicted the senior team, least of all the CEO himself. The meeting ended quickly after that, people scattering like leaves. When they were alone, she whispered, You didn't have to do that. He turned to her. You were right in the elevator. I've spent years closing doors. Maybe it's time to open one. She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, the air between them felt almost weightless. But just as she was about to speak, the lights flickered again. A faint rumble echoed through the floor, the elevator's hum. Michael's gaze shifted toward it, then back to her. Seems the building doesn't like letting us forget. Grace smiled faintly. Maybe it's trying to remind us. Of what? That sometimes the only way out is through. As he watched her walk away, the storm broke again outside, sharp, cleansing, relentless. Somewhere deep inside him, a new door began to open, slow and quiet. He didn't know what was behind it yet, but he knew this much: he didn't want to close it again. And outside the glass tower, the city thundered, as if warning them both that not every door once opened stays kind. The rain hadn't stopped, not really. It only changed shapes from the violent kind that pounded glass to the gentler one that whispered against the balcony railing. Michael sat there still in his dress shirt sleeves rolled up, city lights stretching beneath him, like veins of gold through the dark. He wasn't thinking about profit margins or board meetings. Not tonight. He was thinking about a question that wouldn't leave him alone. Do you ever wonder what people would say at your funeral? That one sentence had split him open. He hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone made him think about what came after all this, after the empire, the money, the control. He had spent years managing people, perfecting systems, mastering silence. But he had never listened. Not really. Now her voice lived in the quiet corners of his mind, soft but insistent. The voice of someone who spoke, because silence had cost her too much. He stared at the city rain, dripping from the edge of the railing. Somewhere down there, Grace was probably asleep, unaware of the way she'd tilted his entire world off its axis. When dawn came, it broke through the storm like a reluctant promise. Grace arrived early the next morning, trying not to think about the elevator, the conversation, or the hair clip he'd left on her desk. She told herself to focus. He's your boss, Grace. That's all he is. But when she stepped into the lobby, Michael was already there. No suit jacket this time, just a navy shirt, and that look, the unreadable one that made her heart tighten in confusion. "Morning," he said. She blinked. "Morning." He hesitated. "Coffee after work." Her eyebrows rose. "Coffee?" "Not as your boss," he added quickly, his voice a little rough, almost shy. "Just Michael." There was a pause, the kind that stretched quiet, but charged. Then Grace nodded. "All right, just coffee." He smiled barely, but it was enough to make the air shift. The hours crawled. Grace tried to lose herself in emails, but her mind kept wandering to his voice, to the strange sincerity behind it. She didn't know what he wanted from her, or what she wanted from him. Maybe just a moment of being seen. When the clock finally struck 6, she gathered her things and told herself she wasn't nervous. Her trembling hands disagreed. Michael was waiting near the exit, holding 2 cups, one black, one caramel-colored, topped with foam. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said. She took a sip and smiled despite herself. "You guessed right." "I'm good with details," he replied. But there was warmth behind the words now, not pride. They walked in silence for a while down streets, still slick from the earlier rain. The world smelled like wet asphalt and second chances. They found a small cafe tucked away on a quiet corner. Wooden walls. Amber lights jazz humming softly in the background. It didn't belong to his world of glass towers. It belonged to hers. Grace sat across from him, still cautious. Michael looked out the window, his reflection layered with raindrops. "My brother used to say something," he said finally. "Whenever life fell apart, he'd look at me and go, 'This is just the in-between. Don't build your house here.'" Grace's chest ached at the tenderness in his tone. "That's beautiful." He nodded. "I think I've been living in the in-between for a long time." She tilted her head. "Maybe it's time you move out." A soft smile touched his lips. Maybe. They talked about nothing and everything. About childhood music, food. Michael confessed he once wanted to be a writer before business took over. Grace laughed and told him she used to sing at her church choir before she forgot what joy sounded like. Every now and then, their laughter would fade into silences that didn't feel heavy. It was the kind of quiet that let truth sneak in. When she told him she was scared of thunder, he said, "That explains the way you looked at the window yesterday." She smiled. "You noticed I notice more than people think," he said. "I just forgot how to care." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. She had known so many men who used charm like armor. But Michael's words carried no performance, only regret. At one point, The power flickered again, a ripple of déjà vu. Grace looked up, startled. The cafe dimmed, shadows stretching across their faces. Michael's gaze found hers through the half-light. For a long, fragile moment, the storm outside didn't exist. There was just this. The hum of the world, two cups cooling between them, two hearts beating quietly against years of restraint. Then the lights steadied again. Grace exhaled. I almost thought we'd get stuck again. Would that be such a bad thing? He asked gently. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. She didn't know the answer. Later, as they stepped outside, the rain had thinned to mist. Streetlights glowed like halos above puddles. Michael walked beside her, hands in his pockets, head tilted toward the night sky. I don't usually do this, he admitted. Coffee? She teased. Talk, he corrected. About things that matter. Grace's smile faded into something softer. Maybe that's why you scare people. He glanced at her. Do I scare you? Not anymore. Her honesty hit him like a pulse. He didn't realize how much he needed to hear that. They stopped at a corner where their paths would split. For a moment, neither moved. Thank you, he said. For what? For making me talk. She shook her head. You were ready. You just needed someone to ask. He looked at her like she was more right than she knew. When Grace got home, she leaned against the door, the warmth of the cafe still clinging to her. She didn't know what this was, a beginning, a mistake, or something between. She took out her phone. One unread message blinked on the screen from an unknown number. Be careful who you let in. Not every man who listens tells the truth. Her blood ran cold. No name. Just a single initial D. She stared at it, heartbeat quickening. Then she remembered what Michael had said earlier. Don't build your house in the in-between. Maybe this was the storm's way of asking how much truth can a person really handle. The next morning, Michael woke earlier than usual. The sky was gray but lighter, as though the storm had passed. He found himself thinking about her again. Her voice, her laugh, the way she had looked at him like he wasn't just a man with power, but a man with history. He wanted to see her. Not in the office, not through glass walls, but somewhere real, somewhere with sunlight. He didn't know that at that same moment, Grace was staring at her phone, rereading the message, torn between fear and curiosity. Because sometimes, truth doesn't arrive with thunder. It comes quietly, like the first drop of rain before another storm. The sky that evening was the color of bruised silver, still damp from the rain, heavy with the weight of things unsaid. Grace stood beside Michael on the sidewalk outside the cafe, holding her umbrella, unsure whether to say goodbye or something more. The night felt strangely suspended, like the moment before thunder breaks. She was about to speak when a voice sliced through the quiet behind them. Michael. He turned, startled. A woman in a fitted black coat was striding toward them, tall, polished, and effortlessly poised. Her heels clicked against the wet pavement with precision, the kind of walk that came from years of knowing people would turn to look. Her lipstick was a dark, deliberate red, her smile even darker. Danica. Michael said the name, sounding heavier than he meant it to. Grace froze. Danica. The letter from the unknown message, the same initial, the one that had warned her. Danica's gaze flicked from Michael to Grace, assessing, dissecting. And who's this? Michael hesitated, and in that half-second, Grace already felt the answer forming. My assistant, he said finally. Danica's smile curved, precise and poisonous. Oh, the cute one. 2 words, the cute one, and suddenly the air between them fractured. Grace managed a polite nod, though her chest had gone tight. Michael said something about old projects, about it being good to see her, but Grace barely heard him. All she could hear was the tone, that perfect blend of elegance and cruelty, the way Danica said cute, like it meant small. It wasn't jealousy that clawed at her. It was invisibility. The realization that even after the coffee, after the warmth, after the almosts, she was still just the assistant. Michael turned back to say something, but she'd already stepped away. "Excuse me?" Grace murmured, her voice breaking slightly as she disappeared into the hum of the street. He didn't follow. That night, the city felt colder than usual. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, still in her wrinkled rose blouse, the faint scent of coffee clinging to her skin. The lamplight painted soft shadows on her wall, but inside, everything felt hollow. She replayed every second the warmth of his voice in the cafe, the sincerity in his eyes, the way he'd said her name. She had started to believe there might be something real beneath the polished surface. And then, Danica's voice, that smooth, effortless tone, had sliced through it all. The cute one. Grace laughed softly, bitterly. Of course. She tried to shake it off, but the memory burrowed in. The way Michael froze. The way he didn't correct her. The way she'd walked away pretending it didn't hurt. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. It wasn't just humiliation. It was history. The echo of every moment she'd been made small, overlooked, underestimated in boardrooms, in conversations, in love. And worst of all, she'd let herself believe this time might be different. Morning came too soon. She didn't sleep much, her thoughts too loud, her hope too fragile. When Grace arrived at her desk, the office was quiet, washed in the cool light of early day. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted faintly through the hall, too familiar, too ironic. She reached for her files and froze. A white envelope sat neatly on her desk. No name, no logo, just a single sentence written in careful black ink. "He hasn't told you everything." Her pulse stuttered. She turned the envelope over, blank. Her eyes darted toward Michael's office glass walls, blinds half drawn. His silhouette moved slowly across the room. Calm, composed, untouchable. Grace's mind swirled. Was it Danica? Was it a threat? A warning or a game? She slid the note into her bag, trying to steady her breathing. Her day unfolded in fragments. Meetings, calls, polite nods, but none of it registered. Every word she heard was muffled by the whisper in her mind. "He hasn't told you everything." By late afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore. Her heartbeat was a steady drum against her ribs as she walked toward his office. Michael looked up as she entered, his expression softening. "Grace, everything all right?" She shut the door behind her. For once, she didn't smile. "I found something on my desk this morning," she said, pulling the envelope from her bag. It said, "You haven't told me everything." He frowned. "Who sent it? I don't know." She placed it on his desk. "But you tell me, is there something you're not saying?" The question hung there, raw and trembling. Michael's gaze shifted, not evasive, but uncertain. His fingers brushed the edge of the paper, then stilled. "Grace," he began carefully, "there are always things I don't talk about, but not because I want to lie." "Then why?" "Because the truth can get complicated." Her voice hardened. "Complicated for you or for me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past her through the glass, where the reflection of the city gleamed like 1,000 small witnesses. She waited. The silence stretched so long, it hurt. Finally, he met her eyes. "Danica and I worked together years ago. We were partners on a project that went wrong, very wrong. What happened after changed both of us." Grace studied his face. There was sincerity there, yes, but also shadows, layers he wasn't ready to unfold. "That's not everything," she said quietly. "No," he admitted. "It isn't." Her throat tightened. "Then when will you tell me the rest?" "When I can do it without losing you," he said. The words shouldn't have reached her, but they did. They pierced and soothed all at once, a confession and a warning wrapped in one. Grace looked down at the envelope again. The handwriting. The message, the silence that followed all of it, felt like the start of something darker. "I don't know if I can trust what I don't understand," she said. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "Then let me show you." For a heartbeat, she almost believed him. But trust was a fragile thing, and tonight it had edges. When she left his office, the storm had returned. Thunder rolled faintly outside, echoing off the glass towers. Grace walked to her car, rain soaking through her coat. In the reflection of the building, she caught her own face, tired, unsure, and behind it, Michael's shadow through his window. She wanted to believe that what they were building wasn't another illusion. But illusions, she'd learned, always begin in rooms made of glass. As lightning split the sky, she whispered to herself, "Don't build your house in the in-between." That night, another envelope slid under her apartment door. The same neat handwriting, the same black ink. But this time, a single word was added beneath the warning Danica. Grace's hands trembled. As she held it, the paper damp from her fingers. Somewhere across the city, Michael sat in his office, staring at the rain again, unaware that the past he thought was buried had just found its way back, not as memory, but as message. The rain had stopped by morning, but the city still looked soaked in silence. Inside Lockhart Tower, everything gleamed, glass, chrome, and illusion. Yet, beneath the reflection, fractures had begun to show. Grace stood by the window in Michael's office, the envelope from the night before still heavy in her pocket. Across from her, Michael leaned against his desk, hands clasped as if bracing himself for something inevitable. "I need you to tell me the truth," she said quietly. He didn't look away this time. "You deserve that." For a moment, the sound of the storm's aftermath, distant sirens, car wheels, on wet asphalt, filled the space between them. Then he spoke, voice low and stripped of its usual authority. "Danica and I. We worked together years ago on a project that nearly destroyed everything I'd built. I knew she was manipulating numbers, altering data, to make the company look stronger than it was." Grace's eyes widened. "And you didn't stop her?" Michael inhaled sharply, gaze flicking to the floor. "I tried, but too late. I thought if I said nothing, I could fix it quietly. I was wrong." He turned toward the window, watching his own reflection blur against the glass. "I was terrified, Grace, of losing the company, the respect, the control. So I said nothing and lost myself instead." The confession hung there like smoke. Grace crossed her arms, her pulse unsteady. "You keep saying you want to be honest," she said, "but you're still afraid of what honesty costs." He looked at her, pain flickering in his blue eyes. "You're right. I'm learning how." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But trust once cracked didn't mend with words. It took something harder, and she wasn't sure either of them had it. "Grace," he said softly, stepping closer, "if you're waiting for a perfect man, you'll be waiting forever. I can't undo what I was, but I can choose who I am with you." Her throat tightened. "And who is that?" He didn't hesitate. "Someone trying to deserve you." The words slipped through her defenses like light through broken glass. She wanted to reach for him, but didn't. Not yet. That night, Grace sat by her window, city lights glittering below like scattered promises. Her reflection stared back, same face, same eyes, But something had changed. She could feel herself standing at a line between belief and fear, between moving forward and running again. The phone buzzed on the table beside her. She sighed, expecting another late-night message from work, but the screen made her freeze. Unknown number. A photo. Her breath caught as the image loaded Michael and Danica in a hallway, his hand on her back, their faces close. The caption beneath it was a single sentence. "He's lying to you. Don't be next." Grace's heart thudded painfully. Her fingers shook as she zoomed in the lighting, dim the photo grainy, but unmistakable. His hand, her shoulder, intimate, familiar. The same man who'd said, "I'm learning how." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Her first thought wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. That dull, familiar ache of betrayal, whispering, "You should have known better." She wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, she called him. He answered on the second ring. "Grace." Her voice trembled. "I got a message." A pause. "What kind of message?" "A picture," she said, each word slow, deliberate. "Of you and Danica." Silence. "Then, when, last night?" "She's leaning on you. You have your hand on her back." Another pause. Then his voice tight. "She came to my office uninvited. Said she wanted to talk. I told her to leave. As she turned, she slipped. I caught her for half a second." "That's what you saw." Grace laughed bitterly. "You're serious?" "Yes. You didn't think to mention that I didn't think it mattered." "That's exactly the problem," she said, her voice breaking. "You keep deciding what matters. You keep editing the truth." Michael's voice softened, desperate. "Grace, listen to me. I know how this looks, but I promise nothing happened. Not this time." Her chest ached at the last three words. Not this time. They weren't meant as confession, but they sounded like one. "Grace," he said again, quieter now. "Don't walk away from me because of a lie." She closed her eyes. "Then stop giving me reasons to doubt you." When the call ended, the silence was unbearable. The following morning, Grace arrived early again. But this time she wasn't there to work. She needed answers. She walked straight to Michael's office, ignoring the stares from the assistants who sensed the tension pulsing between the two of them. He looked up as she entered. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept. "I didn't lie," he said, before she could speak. "I didn't say you did," she replied. "But I need proof. Something real, not words." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll have it." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder, one she hadn't seen before. Inside were documents, reports, emails, evidence of the old project with Danica. "I kept this," he said quietly, "to remind myself of what silence cost me." Grace flipped through the pages, numbers, signatures, timestamps. The picture wasn't clear yet, but she saw enough to believe part of him. Maybe the part that still fought to be good. When she looked up, he was watching her with that same haunted softness. "Do you ever feel," he asked quietly, "like the past keeps knocking on the door, and every time you open it, it drags you back inside?" Grace closed the folder, her hands trembling. "Yes, every day." They stood there, two people staring through the same cracked mirror, seeing each other, but also their own reflections distorted by fear. That night, Grace sat on her couch, the folder open on the table beside her. Rain started again, light, rhythmic, almost soothing. She told herself to believe him, to try. But her heart didn't know the difference between caution and self-preservation anymore. The phone buzzed again. This time just a text. "Truth doesn't need defense. No name, no initial. Just that one line. She looked out the window, where her own reflection shimmered faintly against the glass, fractured by raindrops. And for the first time she wondered if maybe the cracks weren't just in him, but in her two hairline fractures from years of loss, fear, and longing. If trust was a mirror, maybe neither of them knew how to look without breaking it. She touched the window pane lightly, as if to hold it together. Tomorrow she decided she would go back not to forgive, but to understand. Because sometimes the only way to see what's real is to face the reflection, no matter how damaged it's become. Morning arrived gray and restless, the kind of sky that looked like it hadn't decided whether to rain or break open entirely. Grace hadn't slept much. Her thoughts kept circling back to Michael's voice, to the photo, to that one unshakable phrase that had burrowed into her chest. I was afraid of losing everything, and I lost myself. She wanted to believe him. But belief she'd learned wasn't the same as trust. Belief was what you gave. Trust was what you risked. When she stepped into the office, the world felt heavier. Conversations hushed as she passed, whispers rippling like invisible threads. Something was wrong, more wrong than usual. Then she saw her. Danica. Standing by Grace's desk, as if she belonged there, a folder in her hand, a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her black dress was immaculate, her lipstick as sharp as a warning. "Morning," Danica said sweetly. "I thought you might want to see this." Grace frowned, every muscle tensing. "What is it?" "Evidence." Danica placed the folder on the desk, like an offering. "You deserve to know who you're really defending." Before Grace could answer, Danica leaned closer. Her perfume was expensive, cold metallic, like rain on glass. "Men like him," she said softly, "don't change. They just hide better." And then she was gone, heels clicking, smile lingering like a curse. Grace stared at the folder for a long time before opening it. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, financial records, all pointing toward one conclusion: Michael Lockhart had known about the falsified data and benefited from it. Her stomach dropped. There were signatures. His. There were dates that matched the timeline he'd mentioned. There were even internal memos, marked confidential. For a moment, the world blurred. She wanted to believe it was forged. She wanted to believe Danica had gone too far. But doubt had its own gravity pulling her down. Michael was in his office when she entered without knocking. He looked up surprised, but the sight of the folder in her hand wiped the softness from his face. "Grace," he said slowly. "What's that?" "You tell me." She dropped it on his desk. Danica was here. The room seemed to shrink. Rain began again outside, soft but relentless. He opened the folder, scanned the pages, and his jaw tightened. "She's still playing the same game," he muttered. "Is it true?" Grace's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "Were you part of it?" Michael exhaled a long, tired sound that carried years of regret. "Sit down. I'm fine standing." He nodded, accepting her defiance. "Then listen. The first few months of that project were chaos. I didn't create the lie, but I didn't stop it fast enough either. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could fix it from the inside before anyone noticed. That was my mistake." Grace crossed her arms. "So, you were involved." "I was complicit in silence, not deceit." His tone sharpened, not in anger, but in conviction. "When I realized how far it had gone, I turned her in. Every piece of evidence she's showing you now, I handed to the board myself." He opened his drawer, pulling out another folder, older, worn, stamped with official seals. "These are the internal reports. The board cleared me after the investigation. I lost half my partners, my reputation, and almost the company. But I didn't lie. He slid the documents toward her. I'm not proud of who I was, but I didn't build my life on a lie. Grace's fingers hovered over the papers, but didn't touch them. She looked at him, really looked. This wasn't the man she'd met in the elevator, cold and unreachable. This was someone stripped bare, raw, in a way power never allowed. I can't make you believe me, he said quietly, but I need you to know I'd rather lose everything again than lose your trust for the wrong reason. Her throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I thought I'd buried it. Because I wanted you to see the man I'm trying to be, not the one I used to hide behind. The room went still. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows like a heartbeat. Grace sat down slowly, staring at the papers between them. The official reports looked sterile, factual, the kind of truth that didn't feel human. But Michael did. His eyes, weary and unguarded, held something she hadn't seen before. Not apology, not pity, just truth. And suddenly the ache inside her softened. I don't want perfect, she whispered. I just want real, even when it hurts. Michael's expression broke into something fragile. Then you already have it. She stood, taking the folder in her hands. I'll read these, and if you're lying, I won't, he said. Not again. That evening, Grace went to the cafe. The same one where everything had started. The same corner table by the window. The same low hum of jazz. The same scent of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement. Michael was already there waiting. He didn't wear his armor. No suit, no tie, no practiced distance. Just a man in a dark sweater, eyes uncertain, but open. When she sat down, he didn't speak first. He just watched her, searching her face for the verdict. I read everything she said finally. You told the board the truth. He nodded once. Yes, and you still lost everything. I deserve to. Grace looked down at her cup, steam curling up between them. I'm not used to people choosing honesty when it costs them. He smiled faintly. Neither am I. Silence settled again, soft, heavy, intimate. The world outside blurred into streaks of rain and light like watercolor over glass. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. Just the chance to keep being honest. Grace met his gaze. You already are. For a moment, it felt like the storm might finally pass. But then Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it just for a second, and she saw his face change. Everything okay? She asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward her. A single message glowed against the dark background. The truth isn't finished yet. No name, no number. Grace's chest tightened. Danica? She asked. Michael's jaw set. Maybe. Or maybe someone else who wants to keep this alive. Outside, thunder rolled again, shaking the glass. Grace reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Then we'll face it, whatever it is, together. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. For the first time, he didn't feel like the man above the storm. He was the man inside it, learning, breaking, rebuilding. And as the rain began again, soft but endless, Grace realized something quietly terrifying. She wasn't afraid anymore. That night, back in her apartment, she found another envelope slipped under her door. Same handwriting, same black ink. But this time, just 2 words. Not over. Grace stood there, the note trembling in her hand, her reflection flickering faintly in the window. Behind her, thunder rumbled like a warning. Ahead of her, a truth still waiting to be uncovered. The storm finally broke overnight. By morning, sunlight spilled across the city like a hesitant apology. The air was still wet, the streets gleaming, the world washed clean, but not entirely forgiven. Grace stood by her window, the latest note still lying on her kitchen table. Not over. For a long time, she just stared at it, letting the quiet stretch. Whoever was behind it wasn't just trying to scare her anymore. They wanted to make her question everything she believed about him, about herself. But fear had lost its grip. What terrified her now wasn't what she didn't know. It was what she might lose if she ran from it. She found Michael at the cafe that evening, sitting at the same table where everything between them had begun. He looked tired, as if the last few days had carved something new into him. Something softer, something human. When she approached, he stood unsure whether to reach for her or stay still. She made the decision for him, sitting down quietly, eyes on the fading light outside. For a while, neither spoke. There was no need to fill the silence, it was full enough on its own. Then Michael reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Not to pull, not to claim, just to be there. I've spent most of my life trying to fix things with control, he said, voice low. But you make me want to be better, not for what I can keep, but for what I can give. Grace's throat tightened. She wanted to look away, but the sincerity in his voice pinned her there. Michael, she began, her voice trembling. There's something I haven't told you. He nodded slowly, as if he'd known this moment was coming. Then tell me. She took a shaky breath. The man I told you about, the one I lost, he didn't just die in an accident. He was driving because of me. Michael's eyes darkened, his hand stilling over hers. Grace looked down, her words barely above a whisper. We'd fought that night. I said things I shouldn't have. He left to cool off. I called him, begged him to come home so we could talk. He got in the car. 10 minutes later. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The sound of the cafe faded. The city outside blurred. For a moment, there was nothing, just the weight of truth and the fragile heartbeat beneath it. I spent months believing I killed him, she said finally. Years, really. His family never said it, but I could see it in their eyes, like I'd pulled the thread that unraveled everything. I moved here to escape it, to forget. But I never did. Michael's jaw tightened, his own reflection trembling faintly in the glass behind her. Grace. She shook her head. That's why I keep people at a distance. Why I never let anyone get close enough to need me. Because if they do, I might break them too. The silence after that was heavy, but not empty, the kind that demanded courage, not words. Then Michael spoke, his tone steady, deep. No one dies from being loved, Grace. They die when love stops telling the truth. Her eyes lifted, wet, but defiant. What if the truth hurts? Then we live with the hurt, he said. But we live. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't romantic. It was simply real, a truth from someone who had finally stopped hiding behind power. Something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from release. Grace let out a trembling breath. You really think love can survive that much truth? He smiled faintly. I think it's the only kind that does. The sun had almost vanished when they stood to leave. The world outside glowed amber, reflected on the glass walls of the cafe. As they stepped out, a cool breeze swept through the street, carrying the faint smell of rain and possibility. They walked without speaking, side by side. At a red light, Michael reached for her hand again, still careful, still uncertain. This time she didn't pull away. When she looked up, she saw his reflection in a store window, beside them, two figures standing close, framed in light. And for the first time, she didn't see loss in the glass. She saw the beginning of something unguarded, something real. Later that night, They sat in her apartment, 2 mugs of tea between them, quiet music playing from her old speaker. It wasn't romantic in the usual sense. It was quieter than that, almost sacred. Michael studied her bookshelf, the faint mess of papers, the chipped cup by the window. The human details of her life, imperfect, uncurated, grounded him in a way success never had. "This place feels like you," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "It's small. It's honest," he said. And then, almost without thinking, she said, "Stay." He froze. "You sure?" Grace nodded. "Just stay. Not because of me. Because maybe neither of us should be alone tonight." Michael didn't move closer. He just sat back down beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. They stayed that way, quiet, breathing, existing. When the song ended, the silence felt like a continuation, not an absence. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think," she murmured, "that maybe love isn't about fixing what's broken, but learning to live inside the cracks?" He turned slightly toward her. "Maybe the cracks are where the light gets in." She smiled. "You sound like my therapist." He chuckled, low and genuine, the kind of laugh that sounded like rain easing after days of storm. As the night deepened, Grace closed her eyes, feeling the slow rhythm of his breath beside her. For the first time since that night years ago, she wasn't haunted by headlights or guilt. The ghosts were still there, but quieter now, softened by understanding. And in the stillness, something wordless passed between them. Not forgiveness, not promise, but recognition. They weren't trying to escape the past anymore. They were learning to hold it without letting it own them. Michael brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're allowed to stop punishing yourself," he whispered. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Then maybe you should too." He smiled, small but certain. "Maybe we start together." And in that moment, silence spoke louder than any vow could. They leaned into each other, not to forget, but to remember differently. Two people once broken by truth, now trying to heal through it. Outside, the storm was finally gone. But far across the city, a woman in a black coat stood under a streetlight phone, in hand, a faint smile curving her lips as she typed one last message. "Let's see how long silence keeps them safe." 6 months later, autumn arrived quietly, a golden hush over New York. The air was softer, cooler, carrying the scent of leaves that had finally learned how to let go. Grace walked along the park path, the ground a mosaic of amber and red. The city around her moved with its usual rhythm, but her world felt different now. Steadier. Lighter. Like the storm had finally passed. She saw him before he saw her. Michael sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, a cup of coffee in one hand, a small box in the other. He wasn't the man she'd first met, not the immaculate CEO in dark suits who spoke in orders and silence. This man had lines near his eyes from smiling. His hair was a little longer, his posture a little less certain. When he looked up and saw her, something warm crossed his face, not surprise, not even relief, but the kind of peace that only comes after choosing to stay. "Morning," he said softly. Grace smiled. "You're early." "I couldn't sleep." He patted the bench beside him. "Sit." She sat. The breeze lifted a few strands of her hair, brushing them across her cheek. He reached up instinctively, tucking them behind her ear, his touch gentle, but sure. "I've been thinking," he began. "That sounds dangerous." He laughed quietly. "Maybe, but it feels right this time." He held out the small box. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a single silver key. Grace blinked, confused. "What's this?" "Not a proposal," he said quickly. Just a key to my place. She stared at it, the sunlight glinting off the metal. Why? Because you've already unlocked everything else. The simplicity of it undid her. Tears welled before she could stop them. She let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. You're terrible at speeches. I know, he said, smiling, but I'm good at meaning them. She looked down at the key again. Small, ordinary, yet it felt heavier than gold. So this isn't you asking me to move in? No, he said. It's me saying you can come and go as you please. No contracts, no promises. Just a door that's open whenever you're ready. Grace turned toward him, eyes shimmering. I think she said softly, I'm ready. He exhaled, the kind of breath you take when you've been holding your heart too long. They didn't kiss right away. They didn't need to. The moment didn't ask for proof, only presence. Later they walked along the path, leaves crunching underfoot. People passed them, children chasing pigeons, a couple sharing a newspaper, an old man feeding ducks. It was so ordinary, it felt extraordinary. Grace glanced up at Michael, noticing how he watched the world differently, now slower, more curious, as if he'd finally learned that control and peace were not the same thing. You still check your phone too much, she teased. He smiled. Habit. Bad one. I'm trying. She nodded. You're better at trying than you used to be. He looked at her, amused. That a compliment? Don't push your luck. Their laughter drifted through the crisp air, easy, unguarded, alive. As they reached the edge of the park, the skyline unfolded before them. Glass towers catching the morning light, 1,000 reflections shimmering across the horizon. Among them stood the building where it had all begun. The elevator that had trapped them between floors. The moment that had forced them to speak. Grace followed Michael's gaze to it, her expression softening. You still work there? He nodded. Not as much. I let other people lead more now. Turns out listening isn't bad for business. I could have told you that, she said. You did, he admitted. I just wasn't ready to hear it. They stood in silence for a while, watching the light crawl up the glass. Somewhere inside that tower, an elevator hummed faintly. Another story, beginning another silence, waiting to break. Do you ever think about that day, she asked. All the time, he said. It was the first time I told the truth to someone else and to myself. Grace smiled. The universe had to trap you to make you talk. Best malfunction of my life. She laughed, shaking her head. You're impossible. He reached for her hand again, their fingers intertwining easily. You taught me to stop being impossible. They walked until the sunlight shifted, until the city started to move faster again. Eventually, they stopped by a street vendor selling coffee. Michael ordered 2, one black one with too much caramel. When he handed hers over, she raised an eyebrow. You still remember. Some things are worth remembering, he said. She took a sip, warmth spreading through her chest. Then promise me one thing. He looked at her carefully. What? Don't stop being honest, even when it's ugly. Michael nodded. And you don't stop believing in second chances, even when they scare you. They stood there facing each other in the middle of the bustling street, the city moving around them like a river that had finally learned how to carry, not drown. Grace smiled. Deal. Later, when she was home, she placed the key on her windowsill where the afternoon sun could touch it. It glimmered faintly, not as a symbol of ownership, but of permission. The permission to walk through doors again, to love without rewriting the past, to believe that maybe the in-between, the space between who they were and who they could be, was exactly where they were meant to meet. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Michael. The elevator's fixed, but I think we were too. She typed back, smiling. Then let's keep moving one floor at a time. Across the city, The glass tower caught the last light of the day. Inside the elevator, rose smoothly its reflection cutting through steel and sky. Somewhere between the 15th and 16th floor, it paused for a heartbeat, a flicker, a breath, then continued upward. And Grace, sitting by her window, looked up and smiled. Because that was where it had all begun, and because sometimes the silence between floors wasn't there to trap you, it was there to let you hear your own heartbeat again. Love isn't born from perfection. It begins when two souls are brave enough to tell the truth, even when it shakes them. If this story touched you, remember sometimes what we need isn't a way out, but someone willing to stay until the door finally opens.